Hi friends, welcome to It's Your Book Review. Today I'm reviewing Hag of the Hills by J.T.T. Ryder. This book was actually just published this year, 2022, and it is published by Old World Heroism. Never heard of that one, but that's okay. This is the first book of a duology, and it is a historical fantasy novel that takes place in 200 BC-ish, I believe. It is revolving around the Celts, and let's dive into what I think about this book. So first, I am no expert in the Celtic culture or anything historical, really. I really don't read much historical fiction, but I did get a feel of authenticity reading that book. I got really immersed into the world, into the past, into their deities and their culture. I thought that the voices were very authentic, but again, I'm not a professional when it comes to history, so it was just, to me, it felt really genuine and authentic. So well done, that part. Ryder does say in his afterword, I'm going to read this off for you here, I was unafraid to attempt to portray the past as how I interpreted someone living in 200 BC would have experienced it. That is often alien and uncomfortable to a reader in the 21st century. And I think that right there is what made the book great for me. This writer, J.T.T. Ryder, really did not spare the reader at all. He was being very frank and very real with his descriptions and with how the characters interacted with each other, and it was, I don't know, if you play video games, you might get this idea from this example where you have a world where you're just a character running around, you can do whatever you want, or you can play a game where the game requires you to get food because your character will get hungry after a while, or you get tired and you have to take a rest or sleep or whatever. There are those authentic games, and there are the games where you don't experience that. And I got that same feel from this book. This was more than fiction to me. It was a real immersion of the reality of how people back there lived and interacted. So yay, that was awesome. There were some explanations in the front of the book of some of the names and places. There were also some in the back of the book, and I feel that if those in the back of the book had been in the front, that would have been even more helpful, because since there was some explanation in the front, I didn't even think to look in the back because I thought it was all in the front. But some of the explanations that would have really helped to understand some of the characters and some of the things that happened in the story were actually in the explanations in the back. So it would have been great to have that all up front or all in the back. Now let's talk about some of the things that this book could have done a little bit better. I want to start with the characterization of women in this novel and repetition. The women are being, generally, I feel that they're pretty authentic, and this is written from a male's point of view, so the way the women are described, obviously from a male back then, in these historic times and the way they lived, it's rather barbaric, and that's fine, and that's authentic, and that's all great. But when it comes to a point where the women are shown weeping and keening for like 2 pages, that's just a bit too much. You know, women can be all womanized in the mind of a man, but when he observes them just crying and crying and crying, I don't think women in any kind of time period, either of the past or the present or in any kind of situation, would just go sobbing and wailing and crying and then into humming and then sobbing some more and keening and going into a wail and making it a whole kind of almost like a song that goes back into sobbing and then into wailing and keening and humming, and that goes on for like 2 or 3 pages, and it just becomes a bit too much and overdone in my opinion. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe some women in some cultures and some time periods in the past did that over something that didn't really warrant it quite so extremely. But even if they did, that part to me felt over dramatized and not as authentic as the rest of the book. Repetitions. Repetitions was a big issue in this book, and I almost want to say it was the biggest issue in the book. There were both word repetitions and idea and sentence repetitions. So it wasn't just always just a single word that was repeated, but sometimes the idea a sentence expressed was repeated again shortly after. I'll give you some examples here. The girls had left them sky-clad, and now shrieking erupted from the mass of girls on the days. They erupted into a cacophony of shrieks. You can tell here that this is clearly repeated. The second sentence says exactly the same thing as the first sentence. Actually, it says a little less than the first sentence because we don't see where the women are doing this on the days, but it is the same action is described with the same words, actually, shrieks. And it's not always this obvious. Some repetitions are, like I said, of ideas or sentences, and some are not immediate either. Let me give you one more example, and I'm going to read this directly from the book. The council decreed that we must sacrifice our most beautiful maiden and our most powerful warrior. We had to vote on who fits the criteria of each, and we did. One maiden and one warrior will be sacrificed at dawn. A horse died today, seemingly for no reason, and the Vates interpret that we've done something to make Epona angry, and that's why the men came out of the hills to punish us. We're going to sacrifice our most beautiful maiden and our most brilliant warrior to her. So this is a repetition that goes through the entire paragraph. The most beautiful maiden, the most powerful warrior, the most beautiful maiden, the most powerful warrior. I think the only new thing that is coming through at the end here is that they're sacrificing these people to Epona, that the sacrifice is for Epona. That's the new information we get from this repeated line. This could have been done differently without the repetition. And when we eliminate all of these repetitions that are unnecessary, it opens up space for a little more additional information elsewhere. For example, it would have been great to get some more details about or around the sacrifice to Epona. Not details of the how, but details of the why. For instance, why are the man and the woman killed in different ways? Why is the man strangled first, then the stranglehold is released, and then he's knifed? And most importantly, how did the main character feel about this sacrifice? This whole event is given very much in the fashion of a report, rather than letting us experience it through the main character's eyes and mind. We don't really know how he feels, what goes through his mind, or his body emotionally. We know how all of the women feel about it, because they're all crying and keening, again. Which here is appropriate, of course, because somebody is being killed, but I make it a joke because of the other time they were all crying and keening. And one repetition that worked really, really well was the repeat of names and people and deities. To really get used to all of these different things and get immersed into the world, that repetition was really, really helpful. Sometimes the transitions between flashbacks and memories and the present story were a little shaky. They could have been a little stronger. Some of the transitional issues also opened up some clarity issues. For example, the fight against Sycharis needs a much clearer transition. So it reads as though they're still in the middle of fighting, but then they're suddenly sitting and drinking, and we learn that Brennus lost the fight, but we didn't actually see him lose the fight. We didn't see that happening. Well, at least not clearly. He was on his knees, he feels itchy, but we don't know what that means, really. Then he hears a woman's cry, but nothing more comes of that, and then he woke up, but it's not clear whether he was in fact physically out, or because, the moment before he heard the woman's voice, or just out of it for a moment. But that voice gives him a resolve, which indicates he's actually still ready to battle on. And then we immediately move to him having lost the battle, so that's confusing. Next, I want to give a couple of examples for some inconsistencies in the book. One is that I'm fairly certain that Vidov told the Oathsworn men right at the start that he wanted to go to Duntorin. Maybe I remembered wrong, but I thought he did. But then only after they get the deer and the she tells them to go that way does one man object to that idea of going to Duntorin. That's one inconsistency. Another example is where Vidov kills the boar and he says they'll feast at sundown, but then we don't see them feast and 3 days pass. On that last night, they feast on the boar. Vidov doesn't get his first pick like he should. There's a fight, then they feast. Then we go to the next day, or so it seems, at any rate, it says at the end of the feast, and they see boats arrive with hillmen. They talk, and then they go back and say, now let us hold the feast, as if they've been waiting for this feast for a long time. The whole feasting timeline is really confusing, so that section could have used a little bit of cleaning up. Two small things, one plot related, one character related. The time when Brennus finds the tomb right there when he needs to become a new man seemed like a plot convenience to me. He was just suddenly right where he needed to be to make this transition. There was no struggle whatsoever. There was no conflict in finding this place or anything like that. He just was conveniently in the vicinity of his ancestor's tomb when he needed to be there. The other smaller part regarding the character is that sometimes Brennus, or Vidov as he calls himself throughout the rest of the book, sometimes comes off as a little bit thick-headed and stupid, which maybe is intended, but I felt that maybe it wasn't. I mean, that's the impression I got, that he's not always that way, so most of the time he's not. So when he does come off that way, it feels unintentional. There were some tense issues here and there where there was present tense when it should have really been past tense, or past tense when it really should have been present tense. And I don't mean those lines where the narrator describes something in the present moment or in the present time, but when the narrator is describing something of the past and it's being written in present, and vice versa. Then there are some run-ons and some other grammatically wrong sentences. I'm going to give you a funny example here, because this one is a line that doesn't really go anywhere grammatically. So for example, the interior resembled my home, and though it was smaller, with 2 floors and a curtain, obscured the upper floor. Okay. I think what the writer meant to do here is the interior resembled my home, though it was smaller, with 2 floors and a curtain that obscured the upper floor. So it resembled his home even though it was smaller and being obscured by something on the upper floor. So those kind of grammatically wrong sentences, and also run-ons, of which I don't have an example right now, they were throughout the whole book, and there was quite a lot of it. So this book needed a really heavy line at it. I have one more thing for you, and this is actually, it's not something that's bad in the book or good in the book. It's just a funny thing that I wanted to mention because it's something I noticed. I don't know if that was something the narrator did or the writer did, but they seem to have, either the writer or the narrator seem to have an obsession with the number 9. Let me give you some examples. And then I stopped after a while noting down these examples because they kept happening throughout the entire book, and it was just too much to write down after a while, but it was really, really funny. So let's see, we have 9 days of siege, 9 days until Brennus challenges Sycorax, 9 years earlier things of importance happen, 9 hours a day of druid training, 9 hillmen came out of the house when Vidov returns home, some important memories of something taking place 9 years ago, etc., etc., etc. There were more 9-related things throughout the rest of the book, and I thought that was just comical. But maybe the writer intended some comical relief with that. Who knows? All right, conclusion. I really enjoyed this book. I would definitely recommend this read. I will be giving it 3 stars. I would give it 3.5 stars, really, if that was possible on the Goodreads rating. And that's really not a bad rating. 3.5 stars. It really means I enjoyed it. There's nothing monumentally, structurally, developmentally wrong with the book, really, and it's part also personal taste. But 3 stars because of the line edit / copy edit or proofread necessity, as well as the repetitions. The repetitions really, really, really bothered me. But in terms of story and the portrayal of those times and those people back then, definitely this book did it for me. It was a fun read, and you should check it out. Hag of the Hills by J.T.T. Ryder. Thanks for watching. See you next time.